Hey guys, I'm going to wait just a couple of seconds to get started, or a couple of minutes, as people kind of jump on and join. And if they join, and if not, I'm going to record this and send it out to the email list. I always like to introduce each week the same way, and that's just telling you guys where you can find all of my webinars. So if you missed this, or you've missed one in the past, or I refer to something and you think, oh man, I wish I would have seen that. You can find all of my webinars over on my website in one place, just over at andymcnair.com/at-home-learning. So if you'll go there, that's of course where you register for the webinar each week, unless you just see it on Facebook or YouTube. But if you get the email and register, that's where you can do that at. And I also house all of the webinars there just for easy access, and so that it's just one quick place that you can find it. So definitely check that out. I hope it's something that you guys kind of enjoy, and at least have a place to go get some resources and some ideas, and just maybe a different perspective. Or, I love these. I love going live like this just because of the conversation that we're able to have. So if you're jumping in and you're joining, if you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat, just tell me who you are, maybe where you're from, what you hope to learn tonight. This is much more fun when it's conversational and you guys are interacting in the chat as well. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'd love to know where you're from. What you hope to learn tonight. Some of you did that in the form that you filled out registering for the webinar, which is awesome. That always helps me kind of know what direction I need to take it and what I need to share. So I'm going to wait just a couple of seconds for you guys to do that in the comments, and then we will get going. I will say tonight's webinar is not going to be as long. Usually I go almost an hour. This one will probably be about 30 minutes. So if you have 30 minutes, stay on. If not, remember, it'll always be recorded and you can check it out. Kim Jones, right down the street from me. We're actually hanging out tomorrow night. So I'm excited that you're here and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow as well. It always makes me nervous, though. I always say this to my friends. It makes me nervous when my teacher friends are on, right? Like, for whatever reason, I get super nervous. Speaking in front of people I know, sharing in front of people I know, man, it works me up. But I'm so excited you're here, Kim, for sure. All right, who else? You guys introduce yourself in the chat. Don't be shy. Some of you are being super quiet right now. I have terrible wait time, so we may go ahead and get started, and you guys just introduce yourselves as you want to in the chat. All right, I am going to go ahead and get started because I don't want to, that's so sweet, Kim. I don't want to waste your time. I want to make sure that I can get through the content and you guys can get back to your evening and whatever it is that you're doing. I totally get it. I'm always like, oh, it's almost 8 o'clock. I got to hurry up and get ready and get on and all of that good stuff. So tonight I want to talk about something that I feel like is really important and going to be an important conversation moving forward. I've mentioned this often, and it's something that I even really touched on in last week's webinar, and that's just the idea of sustainability. And so I'm not going to share a ton of tech tools tonight, or but it is going to be very practical, because I think the questions we're going to ask and the things I'm going to ask you to put into place, I think these things have to be a priority moving forward. There are so many ideas being thrown around, so many things that we're saying, what if we did this, or what if we do this, or maybe this will work. And that's what has to happen right now, right? We have to innovate. We have to find solutions for these things that we've never had to find solutions before. But I think if we kind of slow down a little bit, pump the brakes, and think about, let's be really intentional about thinking about sustainability. How sustainable are the things that we're talking about going to be moving forward? In other words, we know that things are going to be different, and chances are they're not just going to be different for a little while. They're going to be different from here on out. We have experienced something as an educational community that we never thought would be our reality, right? There has been this opportunity for our kids to learn from home. There has been a homeschool connection that has been created that didn't exist, probably at least in the form that it exists now. And so now we have to think through, and I've said this every week and I'm going to say it again, we were in that reactive place. And so now we have this opportunity to really be proactive. And that's what I want to talk about this evening, is how do we do that? So first of all, let's just talk about what sustainable means. What does it mean for something to be sustainable? And so sometimes when I just want to know, like, let's just get down to what it means, I'll just look it up in the dictionary. So this is what sustainable edits core, this is what it means to be able to be maintained at a certain rate or level. So for me, that means that as we're planning as educators what we're going to do with our learners moving forward, as we're thinking through what this is going to look like for our at home and in class learners, we have to consider, is this something that is going to be able to be maintained at the level I start at? You know, I see some things online and I see things people are sharing and they're putting together, and it's amazing. It's so good. But I always have to ask myself, you know, is that sustainable? Are they going to be able to keep that pace up? Or is that just like, you know, this is different and it's new? Not so much anymore, really. But this new school year, we all know that, right? As educators, when we start a school year, we start off with a lot more energy and a lot more kind of excitement, and then that can kind of dwindle down. And so thinking about it and asking ourselves, is this something that's going to be able to be maintained at this level, I think is important. So what I want to do tonight is I want to look at 2 questions that I think you can ask yourself to really know if that's the case. And whether you're an administrator who is really having to think about considerations for your educators and your learners, or you're an educator who's in the classroom and you're really having to think through, what is this going to look like for my learners? What is this going to look like for my parents? I want to talk about what is that, how do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that makes sense and that's not going to be so overwhelming that we cannot continue at that level? Diana, I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you so much for introducing yourself in the chat. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to share a graphic with you guys, and I'm going to leave this up the whole time that I share because I want it to kind of be in your head after we hop off tonight. I want it to be something that you can refer back to and that you think about often. So I'm going to put that up now, and we're going to talk about these 2 questions that I think are imperative as we move forward. You know, I'm going to read this first sentence to you because I don't know if you guys can see it. Up at the top, it says, in order for anything to be sustainable, it must be both manageable and meaningful, right? We've talked about that before. Practicing these, prioritizing these questions as we move forward will result in a realistic, considerate approach to what learning looks like in the months ahead. And so that whole realistic and considerate approach, I think, is going to be important, right? We have to be considerate of our educators as we consider what's manageable. We have to be considerate of our learners as we ask that question. Is this something that's even doable? Is it meaningful? Because we don't want to waste their time. And then that whole, you know, is it realistic? Like, I think there are so many pie in the sky things going on. And I'll be honest with you guys, if anybody is guilty of that, I am. I love to think of these big ideas. What if we could make this happen? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think when it gets down to kind of the actual doing of something, we have to consider these things. So let's just kind of take these 2 things apart. The whole, is it manageable and is it meaningful? And let's talk through, how do we know that? What does that look like? And how can we really consider that as we're making plans for this coming school year? All right, first of all, let's talk about, it is really that manageable plus meaningful equals that sustainability. So you guys can see the little Venn diagram I have here. Something can be just manageable and something can be just meaningful. And that's fine. But I think what we have to acknowledge and what we have to be honest about is that if it's not both of those things, then it's not going to be sustainable. And so starting that way and not asking ourselves both of those questions can result in the planning, the work that is done on the front end. It can result in that being a waste of time. So first of all, let's talk about, is it manageable? Because I think that's question number 1. I was asking myself that last night. I was like, does it matter the order you ask the questions in? And I kind of think it does, because I think, you know, we don't even need to ask if it's meaningful if it's not manageable. And so I want to make sure that I'm clear here. When I say manageable, I am not saying that it has to be easy. I'm not suggesting that it has to be comfortable. I'm all about getting out of that comfort zone, doing hard things. I think that's important. But I also think that it's important to acknowledge that it does have to be doable, right? If you're thinking about doing something that you just don't have the technology to do, then we have to ask ourselves, is that doable? Maybe not. There are things that larger school districts are going to be able to do that a smaller district may not be able to do. There are things that a smaller district are going to be able to do that a larger district may not be able to do. And so as we kind of acknowledge those things, I think we have two options or two actions that can be taken with whatever our response is to this question. So whether you're designing experiences for your learners, maybe you're thinking through some of the things that are going to be in place for both your both your at-home and in-class learners, or maybe you're an administrator and you're thinking about professional learning for your educators, or you're thinking about the relationships with parents and the procedures that are going to have to be in place. All of that requires us to ask this question first. Is it manageable? And I almost think you could take that a step further and ask, is it manageable within our circumstances, right? With what we have access to, what our learners have access to, what my educators have access to. That's the thing with the situation we find ourselves in right now, is everyone is so different that it's really hard to come up with this one cookie cutter solution and say, hey, this is going to work for everyone. Every situation, every home, every educator, all of that is different. So when we ask this question, there's going to be two responses: either yes, it's manageable, or no, it's not. And so I think, first of all, if it's manageable, check, let's move on to the next thing, and we're going to get to that. But if the answer is no, I think you have a couple of options. So if it's not manageable, I think the first option is always not to completely shift gears. That doesn't mean you have to throw it in the trash. I think you have to, that's where innovation and maybe a different perspective or new way of thinking comes into play. Like that may be where I say, you know what, I can't see this. I can't see this being doable, but I'm going to ask someone else. I'm going to get a different perspective, have conversations. That's where collaboration is going to be really important. Now, if all of that takes place, if you really kind of seek out and you cannot kind of create a different solution, I think that then it becomes, okay, if it's not doable, we have to come up with a different idea or a different strategy. Now, I want to say that, again, does not mean that you have to completely shift gears and do something totally different. I love the word pivot. I think that's going to be an important word this school year. I think that there are going to be so many things that we put in place that are going to be powerful and that are going to work. But if we're honest, there are going to be things that we do that are not going to work, that are going to seem like such a great idea. And then we're going to get in the thick of it and we're going to realize, you know what, this wasn't as great of an idea as we thought it was. It actually isn't going to work. And so that willingness to pivot is going to be really important. I absolutely love that scene on Friends where they're going up the stairs and Ross is yelling, pivot, pivot. And there's that moment of, if we don't turn, this isn't going to work out, right? We're going to get stuck. And so some of those things are going to happen. And what I want to remind you of is that when you're pivoting, there's still a central point, right? That doesn't mean that you're not still focused on that main goal or that main thing that you're putting in place. It just means that there has to be willingness to move, right? That movement has to be an option in order for us to really figure out what this is going to look like. So two options. If it is meaningful, then you're going to consider the next question. If it is manageable, you're going to consider the next question. If it's not manageable, then you're going to have to think through, what does it look like to either get a different perspective or do this differently? Okay, so thinking through that, like I said, if it is manageable, both responses require action, right? Both responses require us to respond and to do something. So if it is manageable, then I think that's when we can ask ourselves the next question. And that is simply, is it meaningful? And the definition of meaningful, or one definition of meaningful, is having a serious, important, or useful quality or purpose. Well, first of all, let's be honest. If something doesn't have that, if it doesn't have a serious, important, or useful quality and purpose, why in the world are we doing it, right? If it's not meaningful, I can tell you right now that with this generation of kids who have information in their pockets, if it's not meaningful, take this whole situation out of the equation. Just in our traditional school, I always said, if it's not meaningful, it is a waste of your time and theirs. And that remains true. So as we kind of think through, okay, I know that it's manageable. That next piece of the puzzle has to be, is it meaningful? And so that's just thinking through, is it going to kind of have this quality that my kids are going to find value in and want to learn? Is it purposeful? Have I kind of thought through, how can I help them make a connection to this, or what can this look like? This is a big piece. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not going to know if it's meaningful until I kind of do it with them. And I don't know if it's going to be something that they want to invest in until I actually put it out there and try it. And nothing could be further from the truth. You would be exactly right. So I would just encourage you to understand that your answer to this question, you kind of have three things here, right? Yes, it is going to be meaningful. Absolutely. I think it's going to be meaningful, but I'm not sure. And then, no, it's not going to be meaningful, right? I know that I'm only doing this because it's going to be on the test, or I'm only doing this because I'm checking off a standard. So let me address that response first. If your answer is no, this is not meaningful, I'm only doing this to check off a box, the reality is, and I know this isn't what a lot of you want to hear, I know that in the classroom, sometimes I struggled with this, we have to find a way to make it meaningful, right? If it's something we have to teach, if it's a standard they have to learn, I don't think we get to say, well, sorry, this just really isn't meaningful. I think we have to kind of really be creative and think through, how can I make this meaningful for them? Or how can I provide them the opportunity to find meaning in this, right? It's all about intentionality. It's all about thinking through, what does this look like? So that Diana, like you're saying in the chat, when they're asking, why are we doing this? They're asking, is this meaningful? Why is this important to us? When they ask that question, will we ever use this? That's exactly what they're asking. How is this meaningful? How is it valuable? When we talk about that statement of, is it valuable for them? I always like to say, there's not very many of us that would go to the grocery store. Now, I will say, when I go to the grocery store and I'm hungry, this is not the case. But when I go to the grocery store and I'm not hungry, or I am ordering online, I tend to be careful about what I'm purchasing, right? I'm not just going to buy something to buy it. I'm going to buy the things that my family likes. I have to see value in it. And the same is true for the learning that happens either in our classroom, right? This is true for at-home learners and in-class learners. If they are not buying what we're selling, we have to kind of up our game, right? We have to figure out how to get them to do that, because they're not going to just grab things off the shelf randomly and learn it just for the sake of learning it. Unfortunately, that's just not going to happen. So I think we have to be super intentional about this, and we have to really think about both of these pieces. They're almost like, it's almost like these are two pieces of a puzzle. I don't know. We do puzzles sometimes around the holidays at our house. And one of the conversations that we have often is, once you can get going, like if you can find a couple of pieces, there's always like, several key pieces. And once you get those key pieces put into place, everything else about the puzzle starts to make sense. It's like, oh, then you kind of get on a roll and things start to go a little faster. And so I think that's kind of the case here, is that these are the key pieces to the puzzle. And so when these two are put into place, everything else will kind of start to make sense. Everything else will fall into place, if that makes sense. So I'm going to pause for just a second and let you guys tell me in the comments, what do you think about this whole idea of asking ourselves, is it manageable and is it meaningful? Does that make sense to you? Is that something you've thought of before? I'm going to wait and get some feedback from you guys before I go on. Diana, I love your comment about helping them see the connections. I think that is so important. It's those connections, I think, that really makes learning meaningful, right? It's the connections beyond the walls of the classroom and beyond the experience that really makes things meaningful. All right, I'm going to try to be patient, which I really suck at. So sometimes there's a little bit of a lag too, so it takes a little bit for your comments to come in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep sharing. If you guys, I'll watch for the comments. I know as soon as I start talking, they're going to start coming in because even when you press enter, sometimes they just take a little bit. But I want to be intentional about this for you guys as educators. We talked about from the perspective of administrators, leadership on campus, also thinking about this, regardless of what you do in the classroom or whatever, really being intentional about asking these questions. Is it manageable and is it meaningful? So I want to talk about designing experiences. And I know I've shared this every week. And if you've heard it, you're welcome to just check out or whatever you need to do. But I have updated the planner and I want you guys to see it because I want you to see where it lives now. And I want to kind of talk through where you can find it because it is a little bit different now. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen and I'm just going to put the banner up with the website. So this is the new address where you can find the planner. You can always find it in all of the places that I've shared, andymcnair.com/planner. But this is really where I kind of put some thoughts and really kind of focused on these two questions, the experiences that we're planning for our learners, right? Or that we're designing for this upcoming year. I've made it very clear that I do not think as educators that you guys should be asked to design one experience for your at-home learners and a different experience for your in-class learners. I think what we're going to have to figure out is how do we do this in a way? How do we design experiences that are meaningful regardless of where they happen? And so those two questions, as you're designing experiences, right? As you're thinking through, hey, how can I engage my learners? How am I going to get to that willingness to invest? What is the experience going to look like that will leave an impression on them? How can I empower them to make a connection to what is being learned? And then what can I provide for my learners who are ready to go deeper? And what can I provide for my learners who struggle? And you can find that template that walks you through all of those steps right here at andymcnair.com/DMLE. And it's all totally free. I'm not trying to sell you something right now. It's all just out there for you to use for sure. So you guys check that out. And but that whole planning process, that whole thinking through some of those things is exactly what we're talking about tonight. As I'm designing an experience, I want to make sure that it's manageable and I want to make sure that it's meaningful. So is it manageable for me, the educator? Is this something I'm going to be able to keep up with? Is it something I'm going to be able to kind of continue at that same level or that same pace? Or is this going to end up taking so much of my time and so much of our space that really it's not a reality for me to consider continuing to teach this way, right? I think sometimes we do something really cool and we get our learners so excited and they're so jazzed. And then we realize, oh my gosh, this isn't manageable at all. We got to pump the brakes. And then we leave them kind of hanging, right? And they're frustrated with that. So I think it's important to ask that question as you're designing a meaningful learning experience. Is this, or just a learning experience in general, right? Is this manageable? Is it something I'm going to be able to continue to put into place? Is it something I can continue to do in my classroom? And then ask yourself, is it meaningful? Right? And after you ask both of those questions, then that action piece comes in, right? Okay, if the answer is yes or no, what am I going to do with that information in order to make sure that this experience is sustainable and that what I'm putting in place is something that I will be able to use in the future? So hopefully that has made sense. Diana, I love that. We do have to be reflective as we plan. And in the planner that I have on this website, there's actually an opportunity for you to reflect as an educator every day, because I think that is so important. I always say there's a big difference between just remembering what happened and reflecting on what happened. Remembering is what I did and how, right? You're just regurgitating what happened. Reflecting is what I learned and why. And that's really what we want to think about as educators. From this experience, what did I learn from it? And why did I learn that? What happened that made me kind of consider this or look at this differently? So as I kind of wrap up, I told you guys tonight wasn't going to be as long because I just didn't have a ton of tools or anything to share, but I wanted to make sure that I focused on really this sweet spot of planning. Because when you can ask those two questions, is it manageable? Is it meaningful? That middle piece that you see there, that gray piece that says sustainability, that's the sweet spot. That's when you know what? Not only is it manageable, not only is it meaningful, but it's sustainable. And it's something that I'm going to be able to continue to do moving forward. And so I think that's going to be important. We don't want to just put things in place that we can only use during the remote learning experience, right? Let's really use this as an opportunity to see things that we haven't been able to see before. Let's use this as an opportunity to think differently about how we teach. I have said over and over again, and I will say it as loud as I can to as many people as I can. In order for this to work, there will have to be a fundamental shift in the way we see learning, right? Nobody's going to change my mind on that. We have got to stop asking, how will I teach? And we've got to start asking, how will they learn? Because when we just ask, how will I teach? We get wrapped up in the idea that, oh, I've got to record every single lesson that I do, or I have to be face-to-face with them every single day. And that's not the case. There's a big difference between just interacting with the content and always receiving that content and information from the teacher. I think there is definitely a place for that. Their direct instruction can be super powerful, but I think we have to consider other things as well. That's just one piece of the puzzle. So just that fundamental shift in, like I said, asking ourselves, every time I get to that place of having that kind of scary moment of, oh my gosh, how am I going to teach? If I can instead think, you know what, how are they going to learn? What do I know about these kids and how they learn? And how can I put that into place right now, regardless of where they are, right? Whether they are at-home learners or in-class learners, what is that going to look like moving forward? So as we kind of wrap up, do you guys have any questions? Are you good? Y'all are kind of quiet in the chat. Diana, I love that you're sharing. And that's cool. Making the transition to being a Texas educator from being in Indiana. I'm sure there were some differences for sure. Well, as we wrap up, you guys are welcome to continue to put your comments and your questions in the chat. I will for sure be watching, and I'm happy to check those and respond. But I just want to say how much, and I always say this at the end, but I think it's important to just remind you guys, you are enough. And we are going to get through this, and we're going to be better for it, right? We're going to be stronger as an educational community. There's going to be bumps in the road this upcoming year. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to be hard. But gosh, it's also going to be, I think, an opportunity for us to try some things and learn some things that we might not otherwise have done. And so doing that, I think, will give us that little shift in perspective to realize this is hard, right? It's not easy, but I think it's going to be worth it. And I think we're going to see some things come out of this that will change what education looks like from here on out. It'll never be the same, right? This has changed everything. So I appreciate you guys so much. The work that you're doing right now, the work that you'll continue to do moving forward. I absolutely love with all of my heart the Meaningful Mess community and what you guys bring to the table and the conversations that we're able to have. So I will share this webinar on the website soon. You guys feel free to share it with anybody and everybody. Again, if you ever want to check out the websites or listen to past webinars, I don't know what I just said. I didn't say webinars, but that's what I meant to say. If you ever want to check out the webinars, you can always visit this website, andymcnair.com/edhomelearning. All of the information is there. I would love for you guys to join my email list so that you get reminders and all of that good stuff. All of that happens at andymcnair.com. So thank you so much for being here this evening. I appreciate you guys. Go get some rest, drink a Dr. Pepper, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye, y'all.